Well, welcome everybody. I am really tickled to be here. I want you to know that I think this is probably the most beautiful show I've ever curated. These women just brought their A game, and so what we're going to do on the tour is I've picked out a few pieces. The lecture that I've prepared for this evening will be thinking more about some of the theory, some of the ideas that have built and contributed to what the show became and how they worked with the artists. But on the VIP tour, what I thought was I could maybe talk with you a little bit about what I know about the artist personally and some of the things that are in the exhibition that are not reflected in the labels, but will give you a sense of why this works for them the way that it does. So my name is Ahtone, and I'm the guest curator of this exhibition. I'm very humbly here at OSU. A lot of people think because I work at OU, that I believe it has been said to me before, well, you're walking on the dark side, but you should know that my mom actually got her PhD from OSU, and my grandfather was one of the first Native Americans to graduate from OSU back in the 20s. He actually was got on a baseball scholarship here. So a little bit, I'm just as honored to be here as I am anywhere else. And so what I'd like to do is welcome you into the gallery, and if you'll come along, we're going to talk first about these two works. I am looking forward to meeting each of you, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon to come and sit and listen to me. I really, sometimes people think being a curator is kind of a fancy job. I will tell you, mostly it's a lot of hard work and sweat. I was here on Saturday helping to place some of the artwork, and I'm just really honored to get to work with these artists. There are two sisters in the show, and that is Terry Greaves and ahtone. They're both Kiowa and Italian. They grew up in Montana, so they have family ties here to Oklahoma, and they actually come to Oklahoma several times a year, and I'm really happy when they come by and say hi to me and Norman. But they are two incredibly strong women who are very well grounded within their Kiowa traditions. Their mother passed away just a little bit over a year ago, and they were the three of them were just a tight little crew. And one of the things that's in this work, for instance, by Terry Greaves, which this is an image that depicts Mother Earth and Grandma Spider. Mother Earth sort of represents the idea of the woman whose baby becomes known as Tali in the Kiowa traditions, and Tali becomes the Kiowa people. He's a sacred boy, and he was raised by Grandmother Spider. But an interesting, real specific thing in this piece is the outline of the hand is actually Terry's mother's hand. So that's not just an abstract or, the idea of a hand. She actually had her mother's hand drawn on a piece of paper. She's been using that for the last year and a half just to kind of like feel that relationship between she and her mother. And because even with a patrilineal tribe like the Kiowa community, where you have things coming through the men's societies, social structures are guided by these societies, which are largely male-dominated. But I will tell you that my grandfather, who came here to OSU, is a Kiowa man, and I was raised with this community. And one of the things I will tell you is that while the men may be the face of it, the women are the spine. And so even for these three women, Carrie and Terry, and their mother's name was Jerry, that the idea of how you behave and how you are raised, this all firmly rests in the hands of the women. Even the male children, as they're coming up for initiation, it's because their mothers or their aunties or their grandmothers think it's an appropriate time for them. That's not a decision that the men make. So this is one of those things where you see in cultures that the sort of gendered structures of the relationships that people have to each other. Within our native cultures, there are some real clear parameters of what is women's work and what is men's work that persists even to this day. And that kind of leads us to think about this work that ahtone has done. Carrie is a master metalsmith, and I will tell you as a curator, I don't throw the idea of master around very easily. It's not a premise I'm really terribly comfortable with. But there are people who just take a particular medium, and they are not only able to do something really lovely with it, but they innovate with it. And so each of the pairs of sunglasses that come in this box there is a very specific story that is being told with that pair of sunglasses. And the experience of putting on those lenses, and Carrie's, she was describing this to me, because I actually came to her only looking for this one purse when I was curating the show. And she said, well, Heather, let me tell you about these sunglasses I've got. And she said, the idea is that everybody in their world, that we all have our own lenses that we look on and absorb information through. She said the idea with this is just to give people the idea, if they could look through a Kiowa worldview, this is what the world would look like. And that's the idea that she kind of created these sunglasses with, is just to remind us that we all come from a very particular and specific cultural experience, and that it is important for us to learn about other cultures. I will say that one of the things in this exhibition is that there are 20 artists in here, but there are only 17 communities, tribal communities. But even of those 17 communities, every one of them has their own unique Genesis story, and every one of them comes with a particular, they may have things that they share with other tribal communities, but their tribal community proper, they have their own story. And it might sound like someone else's story, but it's not. It's their story. And it's important when we think of often the idea of Native America gets conflated like there's one Native indigenous culture to this continent. The truth is, even in just the United States, there are 566 federally recognized tribes. That's unique nations. That's not even counting the communities that are recognized by their states or local governments. So I wanted to move on into the other gallery, and I'm going to come around here, and Matt's following me, so I'll try not to feel too nervous. We're going to talk about this work here, so if you want to come on in. Come on in, come on in. There's so much room in here. So this project largely is the result of many conversations that I have had. Some of you, this might be the first time you've gotten to listen to me, or it might be the first time you ever even heard about me, and that's totally fine. And if you forget about me after today, I probably won't hold it against you, because it's easy when there's so many people in this world to get to know. But I will tell you, I have been working around Native American art since 1993, when I started working at the Institute of American Indian Arts Museum in Santa Fe. There's plenty of room if you guys want to come around, because I want you to be able to see this art back here. So when I began working in 1993 at IAI's museum, I was actually hired as the public relations liaison. They had a marketing director, and she was mostly in charge of what was supposed to go on with the writing about the museum. But the director at that time, he was a little concerned that they were having trouble conveying to the community how these contemporary artists, which are the fantastic artists that come through and are participating in our contemporary Native American arts community, but they constantly kept getting put by this, press and media, and even art history writers about art historians would constantly kind of use this sort of Euro-Western perspective to sort of place them into some kind of context and continuum of art. Well, here's the thing, I had just graduated with a degree in creative writing, so I knew I could make stuff up. But the idea of trying to tell a story on behalf of someone else, like, I took that as a really genuine mantle of something that I needed to do a good job about. Because when I was looking at these artists, I might not know what their communities are, but I was familiar enough with, I'm sure somehow I've set those alarms off. I do this at my museum all the time. That's probably my grandpa telling me not to lie. I promise I wasn't. But so when I went to work for the IAI Museum, I took it as a real serious challenge. Not to my capacity to write. I felt very confident, because when you're young, you're confident that you can do anything. But more importantly was that I really felt like, and all the things that I was reading about some of the artists that we were bringing in, was that everything that had been prepared for them really didn't understand how their work was relating back to their traditional tribal culture. And that is not to say that every Native American artist has to be writing or working from some inspiration driven from their culture. I not only don't believe that they all are, I don't believe that they should or necessarily have to, because artists should have the freedom to be able to do whatever it is that they are inspired to do, and I'm happy to support artists to do that. But I do find that there are a great deal of Native artists for whom that relationship becomes very difficult to translate to the unexpectant viewer who doesn't necessarily come with a deep knowledge of their culture to be able to necessarily understand what it is that they are trying to do when that is the case. I'd like to point out Marie Watt's Blanket Tower, or Blanket Story. And this is a piece that was actually made for us here in Oklahoma. If you guys know of a home where it could stay forever, we sure would like to have it stay here, or at least I would. Marie Watt is a Seneca artist. She lives in Portland, Oregon. She was raised by a Seneca mother and what she calls her cowboy father. He's Scots-German, or German-Scots, and she grew up, as both white and as Indian. But she also didn't feel like those were necessarily identities that were antagonistic to each other. Her father really embraced her mother, raising her and her sister in a Seneca home. And a Seneca home is defined by having a Seneca mother. That's a very, not only tradition within their tribal culture, but it is also their political position. You can't be Seneca unless you're born to a Seneca woman. So it's not if your father is Seneca and he marries outside the community, by default, those children cannot become enrolled within the Seneca community. And that's their choice to do that. That's what sovereignty is about. They have the right to decide who their citizens will be. Marie Watt, as a woman born to a Seneca mother and as a mother of 2 girls herself, she continues that line. And in the Seneca story of Sky Woman is the progenitor. She falls from the sky. That's where she gets her name. It's a longer story. I'm abbreviating it for you here. But she is not happy, and she falls through a hole, and she's falling. And as she doesn't know what's below her, because when she was looking down, it was just kind of dark. But as she fell through that hole, there was a group of animals that saw her coming. And so some birds went up, and they actually held her up aloft in the sky. And in the meantime, the animals down on the ground were at that time, the ground was nothing but water. And so at that time, the animals are like, well, she doesn't look like she's going to do too good in the water. That doesn't look like a good situation for her, but she's so beautiful. How can we prepare for her? And so the turtle, who had a hard and durable surface, he says, she can land on me. And the other animals are like, man, you're slimy. We don't want her landing on you. She'll get all dirty. And so the mud diver goes down and starts pulling up dirt from below the water and pulling it up. And he layers this top of the turtle's back with this different sediment. From a Seneca and Iroquoian perspective, this is how we get the idea of Turtle Island. Turtle actually gave himself over, and we all walk on the back of that same turtle. And that land, the sediment that was brought up by the earth diver, is what creates the stratigraphy that we see when we're walking around the land, those different times that he went down and made different trips to bring that earth back up. And so in that way, those animals were preparing a place for Sky Woman to land. That's what Marie Watt is doing here. She's preparing a soft place for a Sky Woman to land, because if Sky Woman doesn't land, the Seneca people would not be. So the idea is that as each generation of Seneca women come into this world, they perpetuate that line of Sky Woman into the present. And so the inaction of creating a safe place and a soft place for her to land is a really important thing for a Seneca person, a Seneca woman to do. And so Marie, because she's pretty bold, and I do kind of like bold women, as you can tell from this gallery, she's putting landing spots for Sky Women all over the world. She's just installed one in Pakistan. She is installing them in all over the East Coast. They have one at the Tacoma Art Museum. They have one at the Denver Art Museum. And she's just basically seeding little places all over the globe for Sky Women to have a place to land and be safe and be welcomed. It is, of course, you can't not look at this and think of the sort of response this is as a feminist artist to many of the sort of sculptural structures that we think of. Her work has been compared to Constantine Brancusi's Endless Column, which is a piece that's in Romania, and it's hard, durable metal, and it's just like these rhombozoid shapes that are stacked and repeat until they feel like they go off into the, into the sky. Well, she is doing kind of the same thing in a completely feminist manner, using soft blankets. You will notice that there are, I'm not touching the tags, Carla, but I didn't want her to get worried, and you guys can't touch them either, but everybody who donates a blanket is invited to tell the story of that blanket on the tag. And then these hang off in different places. So sometimes they get folded underneath and you can't see them, but each of the blankets is a story of where that came from and who gifted that to Marie to be used in her art. So this is a way that she builds community, right? She's not only creating a space for Sky Women to land, but she is also building community through these interactions. And she's a pretty special lady. I'm really excited. As soon as I resend my my finished work to the First American Art Magazine, I'm actually publishing an article about her in their next issue. And so it's been a real pleasure to get to work with her for this show and have a chance to really think about what she's doing and share that with the community. In a similar and likewise manner, Cara Romero, who's Chemehueve, that's a tribe in California, she uses photography to reimagine these creation stories. And the two pieces that when she and I spoke, we talked about, I actually knew about these two pieces, but she said, you might be interested in these other two. And what she's done is she's taking underwater photographs and reimagining the impact of the Great Deluge, the floods that happen in all of our traditional cultural stories. I mean, this is in Genesis too, right? So people all over the world have these flood stories. And she's visually illustrating those stories for us, because these things and their impact continue to have a role within our contemporary experience, and how important it is for us to see that those things have the potential to affect us, and that these stories have a continued life and a continued application of the lessons from them in our day-to-day life. So we're going to move to that back gallery. Who did? So the first one that I wanted to visit about is actually this work by LuAnn Redeye. I will tell you that by the time that we had gotten to where we were doing the installation, LuAnn and I, and you should know that there were, how many pieces were actually made for this show? Almost 20 of the pieces were actually made for this show because the artists were very excited about them. This series right here, this group of portraits, which is actually a single sort of triptych, was made for this show. And LuAnn is a young artist. I hate to admit that she was probably born after I had graduated high school, if that's possible, because I don't feel that old. But she's really, as a young artist, really coming into her own. And I find her an incredibly courageous young woman. And I have bought a couple of pieces of hers for my own personal collection. She's a printmaker, and you know, part of why I can afford hers because prints are not as expensive as like a large painting. But when I talked to her about this exhibition, she was pregnant. A year ago, she was pregnant and thinking about what it was going to be. She had just found out, and I said, well, you know, this show is about women. It's the stories of women. It's the stories how we as women are guided by the women in our creation stories on how to be women in the 21st century. And I think that this is a concept that for her, being in that state of pregnancy really just hit her. And she said, I have an idea. She said, let me think about this. And so about 2 days later, I got an email, and it basically described what this group was going to be. And that is that for many of us in the Native community, myself included, the issues of some, you know, children being taken away from their parents at a very young age, and you know, some of the issues of drug abuse and alcohol abuse, these have created across generations a historical trauma that doesn't necessarily just die off with the previous generation. It informs how you treat people, because if you haven't been fostered to be cared for and nurtured, it's hard to translate those into your own actions. You don't really know what that's supposed to look like. And so LuAnn comes from a family that has had a lot of issues with alcoholism and historic trauma carried down through these different things. It's a pretty sad story to some effect. I will tell you, it's just not that uncommon. And so I really said, you know what, LuAnn, if you feel like you have the courage to tell this story, then let's do it. And we'll create space for you. And so she's taken a format that is a very traditional Seneca. She's also Seneca, traditional Seneca frame format. They bead them. You're probably familiar with them because this is a much more sort of traditional idea of what Seneca beaded frames look like. And this is a portrait of her and her grandmother. And so this is, and that's what that is. It's her grandmother. So her grandmother helped raise her. And this is an image of LuAnn and her brand new baby. He's almost a year old now, so he's not quite so little, but certainly it still shows like where they live, this idea of like how home is defined. You've got the home of the grandmother back there, but then how that becomes like a blueprint of a division. And then it's got all these images of Seneca images behind with the birds. These birds reappear here, but they're just screen printed. And so she's translating that into different media. But I will tell you that this is the portrait she made of her mother. I'm gonna get choked up because when I opened this box, like she told me, she's like, I don't know how you're gonna feel about this, Heather, but I'm sending this and I don't even know how to describe it. But she's like, I'm real happy about the one about my grandmother. I'm real happy about the one with me and my son. But she said the one with my mom, it just hurt. It hurt to make it. But she said, I've got to put that out because as a mother, I can't keep taking that pain with me. I've got to get it out so that I can become the mother that I want to be. And so it comes in this little box and you can't see anything. It's got a little hinge on it, you know. She did a really nice packing job. And I lifted open that hinge and I pulled off the protective sheet because of course all those quills had to be protected, right? So you didn't like reach down. And it just took my breath away. I mean, just the intensity of all those quills and the way that they're like coming right at you, that they're blood red against that black like depths of despair, and just the way that she's just physically scratched out the face of her parents. I mean, just what is that? You know, how much emotion has to be in that moment? This is such a raw emotion being expressed artistically. And again, it's got the home that she grew up in, which you can see is not terribly well kept. It's not, you know, it's just all those things that we know about of living in a reservation that are not positive, just expressed into a tangible object. I think it takes a lot of courage for a woman to do that. Any artist, truly. I don't think that's limited to just women. I think I've seen some men do some really profound things. But the juxtaposition of that negative emotion against these really, I think, very beautiful and feminine forms speaks to how important it is to take those lessons that we have in our creation stories and heal ourselves and prepare for that next generation and hopefully not pass that pain on and somehow stop and halt that historic trauma. So I just wanted to, and I'm so glad I didn't get completely flustered because I almost lost it there. So. And then the one I wanted to finish on, and please know that last night I was kind of thinking, how do I get them through all the gallery spaces? I'm not talking about a lot of artists here that right now I hope that you can see just like how much these artists have invested in their work. But this is another piece that was made for the show. Molly is a non-enrolled descendant of the Oglala Lakota community, which means that her mother is Oglala Lakota, but she, for some of the same kinds of political reasons that I described in the Seneca community, the tribe has made a decision about what you have to be or how you have to qualify for citizenship within that tribal nation, and she simply doesn't qualify, but she's been born and raised in a household raised by, and she still has a great relationship with her mother, who is Oglala Lakota. She was raised and taught how to do traditional beadwork, and so this is a box. Vicki, can I lift the lid? You guys can't do this. What I want to show you is that it is completely finished on the inside as much as it is on the outside. And if you want to get a look at that, that might be the only look a lot of people get, so go ahead. What it has inside is a duplication of what you see on the lid, and it goes across, so the bottom is an exact opposite of this, and then these repeat up into a point. This is a symbol that is representative of the morning star, and it is a representative of sort of that like rebirthing energy. So I'm going to go ahead and replace it, and I have to be careful because it does. The pink rose goes out towards us. Okay. And you can see that she's actually used these little pony beads here to create sort of locking mechanisms, so the pink, it rests very cleanly on there. She's incredibly skilled at making these boxes, and I'm really thankful for her labor in doing all this. You can see a lot of thought has gone into it. And what she's done is she's taken these 4 different flowers. Did you say the pink rose goes out? Yeah. I think I need to rotate that around. Okay. Because that looks more like a rose to me. Does that look like a rose to you? Okay, I think that's the rose. And so what she has done is she has taken these different flowers that are floral elements that are part of a story about Anangite. That is a figure that I don't know a whole lot about, so I'm not going to go into the detail that I did with Sky Woman. But what she's done is that she has provided to the viewers, using digital technology, she basically beaded what's called a QR code. That's a quick response reader, I think is what QR stands for. And so if you have like a smartphone and you have a QR code reader, you can just scan that, and then the QR code will take you to a portion of the text that tells the story about Inangite. And so each of these then follows around, and it's both a visual and a textual description of the story of this figure. She also has shared with you, while you may or may not recognize it, many of our traditional stories get encoded into particular designs groups. And so these designs that are along these panels are how this story has been encoded, not in text, but through design. And then those designs have been reused and reused and reused. So if they look familiar to you, or you're like, oh, I've seen stuff like that. Well, this is part of how in traditional communities we have held on to our knowledge, is we have created basically a visual text so these designs read in that manner. That's not to say every design that you've ever seen of any native art necessarily is that kind of encoded text, but it is to say that we have been incredibly ingenious in how do we hold on to these stories. So not only the storytelling experience itself, but also through our artistic expressions, we have been carrying these, this knowledge from the beginning of time, for real. That's the end of my tour. Nobody's asked hardly any questions. We did have the one good question in the other gallery. Does anybody have any questions before we break from this? This is an installation by Tmac Stevens. Tmac Stevens is a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. She is an incredibly well-respected installation artist. She's been included in things since the 90s. She was in Reservation X and Indigena and some of the really seminal exhibitions that really promoted contemporary Native arts. And she made this for this show. So this is the story of, it's called Force of Nature, but it is the story of the emergence of the Seminole people into this world. Many of our tribal communities have stories of coming from other worlds or emerging into different worlds. For instance, in the Navajo story, we are currently in the fourth world, and they have a pretty eloquent, epic description of the whole of the story. For the Seminole people, they believe that they emerged from a cave that's located in southeastern part of the United States. The Seminoles are relatives of my Choctaw and Chickasaw relatives, and so there's some commonalities. Like I said, you have some shared knowledge of these stories. But what I know of the Seminole story is that when the people emerged, it was all darkness, and the way that they knew that they had come into a new world was that the first people coming out of the cave, as they stepped out into the fog, a dark fog, is that they actually felt the presence of the wind on their face. And so when they came out, those people who came out first become members of the Wind Clan. And so as people have emerged in different experiences, that this is how people kind of got attributed in the beginning into the different clans that exist within the Seminole community. To this day, what has been explained to me is that even when they're in their ceremonial processions, that order of their emergence and how these clans became created remains the foundational order upon which the events within the ceremonies take place. So when they come out to sing, the first clan that takes leadership in that procession will be the Wind Clan. And it's because they don't ever forget that these were the first ones to come out and emerge. So you can see that she has taken, which I think it's kind of ingenious, to take the idea of like a metal screen, and she literally molded it to get the circular design into it. And of course, not only do you get that circular design happening in here, but you get it happening too on the shadows as it casts behind it. And so she's using this basket to kind of reference that creation of the world as if the world were a basket. And that her personal world is founded through both of her grandmothers. And so she has presented her grandmother's portraits on each of the windows. It's simple in a way, but it's, I think, quite eloquent in communicating this idea of how one's identity and position within a community can be also follow suit. It seems simple, but then of course, it's a very complex experience, right, to live that. So is that helpful?
But did she come and do this?
She came and did this, and actually, Carrie, can you speak? Because if I'm not mistaken, you guys had OSU students come and help her do the installation?
Yes, we had 4 OSU students.
She was just here Friday.
Yes, Megan was one of them who helped, but it was really important for her, she said, to engage the community in this making process. She wanted it to speak of the community, and so she worked with them and asked opinions and suggestions, and they were really a vital part of this process. And she talked a lot about on campus with several different groups of students and faculty about how important that is. It's integral to her process of making installation work.
That's actually kind of common, and I don't know that it's necessarily uncommon outside the Native arts community, but that's the community that I feel like I see it happen more often, is that sense of community, not only just in the construction of the concept, but also in the actual construction of objects. As I mentioned, Marie builds those towers because people want to be a part of it by donating those blankets. There's other aspects to her work. The large fabric piece on the back, which is called Pleiades Trek. The Trek is in reference to the Star Trek Enterprise, which is stitched into it. If you haven't realized that it's there, you need to go look closer. But the idea is that those forms that you see that are sort of triangular with a little bit of a tail, that is derived from a basket design referencing stars. And so what she's talking about is the Pleiades constellation and how our future and our history are both inscribed into the stars themselves. But the stitching of all the little designs on there is actually done through community sewing circles that are conducted. We had actually tried to work with Marie to have her come and do a sewing circle here. Unfortunately, her daughter has been very sick this year, and it's been prohibitive for her to be gone very long. But just so you know, for many of the women, and I believe that also Anita Fields is coming to do, you describe it because I don't want to butcher it. But
October 10th through the 15th, she'll be here doing residency, interactive residency, where she'll work with 3 to 4 groups of community members every day, and they're creating a collaborative installation that is inspired by Mother and the role of Mother in the Osage tradition, whether it's Mother Earth or
our birth mother,
right?
yeah.
And so that will be on display in the art lab until the end of the exhibition once that's completed. So we still have some spots if you're interested.
Yeah, so jump on that. I think for Native people, and I don't just mean women, the idea of community is something that is core to who we are. I'm thankful to be a part of the arts community here in this state. I have great friends here and happy to have made new friends in the course of working on this project. Before we finish, which I think, is there any more questions? Because I don't mean to cut anybody off, but.
Did you purposely ask the artist not to be political? Didn't seem like there was a lot of political, maybe just one.
You know, that's an interesting thing because I didn't. And we know that there's a couple of artists, some of you may know, some of the artists that are included here have been political in their other work. This show is about the relationship that the artists have to their creation stories. So the thing is that for many of us, and I feel this way myself, our very being is political, but our identity is rooted in our culture. And so you can shed some of those, and there might be perceptively political statements in this show, but they were really working from that core idea. Everything that was included in the show, this isn't just random selections of what they had available or just general sort of requests for submissions. This was me going to artists that I said to Vicki and Sean when he was here and saying, these artists I know are working with this idea. I see it in their art, and most of them we had conversations that had led me to believe that this could be done. And so this exhibition really reflects their interest in telling that specific story. And we'll avoid politics until after the election. I was like, I don't care where you're voting. I don't want to talk about it. So we'll be doing a lecture here in not too long and probably start right on time at 6. I'm only planning to talk for about 40 minutes, so if you are able to stay, it is not the same notes. Your visit here is probably the only chance anybody's going to get to hear the stories that I've just described. But I do want to tell you that there are some other events. Could somebody who has a better memory maybe recite some of the other events that are going on? Carrie, do you want to?
Yes, and we have flyers in case I get the wrong. But we have Nita's is October 10th through the 15th. Sarah Deer will be coming. She'll be speaking on the 12th.
If you're not familiar with Sarah Deer,
11th.
The 11th.
She'll be speaking about, she's a legal authority speaking about violence against Native American women. It is
yes, yes. That is political for certain, but I will tell you it's not just political. It is about the survival of our people and how we take care of our women. And I think that was the thing that when Shan was talking with you guys about the basket, her basket specifically is probably the most political thing because it is about taking care of women. In our tribal communities, that idea of things being gendered gives responsibilities to both men and women in what we contribute to the community as a whole and the health of the whole. As those issues and ideas have gotten, syncretized with American society, and I'm not trying to speak against American society, but there's been a shift, right? We do see a higher incidence of violence against Native American women. I think if I'm not mistaken, Native American women are 300 times more likely to be raped or abused. That's why I don't talk about it, because it just cuts me. I think the statistic is 2 in 3 women. 2 of every 3 Native American women will experience that. So Sarah Deer is one of the leading national spokespeople. She works with Amnesty International and has worked to help develop the text that got passed by Congress. And I'm going to butcher it, but it's an act that protects Native American women, specifically by shifting some of the political parameters that particularly on Native American reservations. I will tell you this, people often make the assumption that because that violence is more often happening on Native American land, that it's happening at the hands of Native American men. That is not the case. It's largely non-Native men who are abusing Native women. But because they're on federal protected lands, they're not subject to the same laws. So there's just, Sarah Deer helped write the legislation that has since been passed to protect women on federal land. And then she is an amazing, I've seen her TED Talks, I've seen her, and there are ways you can look at her if you can't come to her talk, but you might be real interested to hear someone talk about it who's a lot smarter about it than I am. Possibly not quite so emotional. So I have a lot of girls I'm raising, so I was like thinking about them. So. Great. Okay, and that was what day? I want to make sure it's on the October 11th at 6 p.m. at the School of Architecture. And then on the 15th, Anita Fields and I are going to have a cup of coffee, and if you want to come and listen to us talk, we'd be happy to share a cup of coffee with you. And then also Roams the Earth Dance Troupe is performing at the reception, which is October 25th, and at 5 to 7, I think. And
6 o'clock is the performance, but the opening reception is 5 to 7.
And then there's a family day. That is, what day is that?
That is the second Saturday of every month, and so it'll be the second Saturday.
Okay. October, November.
And the one in November is really special. Cricket Road's Connie Birdie is a traditional Kiowa storyteller, and she'll be sharing stories and traditional games with the visitors that day. So please come. And Nicole Seen Pankilla will be doing a traditional beading workshop on the same day, and then a round table.
Yes, which is in November 10th.
November 10th.
We're putting it together piece by piece. Yes. November 10th, Louise Siddons is hosting a round table with artists. So I'm going to come and listen to them talk about it, but and I will be here, but not at the table. And those artists are eloquent enough to speak without me. And if you enjoy listening to them, you will enjoy that. And is there anything else? That exhausted what I could think of. Does that sound? They have heavily programmed this, but it is a special opportunity for us to look at this particular theme in a community where I think these issues and topics are not only relevant but timely. With that, I'm just going to thank you all for coming today, and I hope that you'll stay, but if you don't, I promise I just really even appreciate that you made this little bit of time to listen to me go on. Again, I'm just so very honored and humbled to be here, and I want to thank the OSU staff who have worked tirelessly. I don't even know if there are words to express how hard they have worked. I know they've worked almost all the last few weekends without a break, and I just appreciate everything that everybody has done. And I have a list of names, but I'm going to read that off at the lecture, so we'll let you guys off the hook of that.